It looked like something pulled straight out of a toolbox, a weapon that seemed more at home under a sink than on a battlefield. Cheap, crude, and deadly in all the wrong ways. They called it the plumber's pipe. The Sten Gun, Britain's answer to desperation. A weapon so simple it could be built in a garage, so unreliable it could get a man killed faster than the enemy. But in the darkest hours of World War II, it became the gun of the common soldier, the lifeline of resistance fighters, the weapon of the poor, and the symbol of how far a nation would go when backed against a wall. This is the story of how Britain's cheapest weapon won a war, and how its flaws nearly broke the men who carried it. In 1940, Britain was on the brink. France had fallen. The British Expeditionary Force had barely escaped Dunkirk. And now, Hitler's war machine stood poised across the Channel, ready to invade. Britain needed weapons, fast. But there was a problem. The Army's standard submachine gun, the Thompson, was American-made, expensive, and slow to import. Each one cost the government nearly $200, a small fortune when the nation was bleeding resources. Factories were bombed. Supply lines were strangled. British soldiers were fighting with old rifles while the German infantry carried sleek MP-40s. If the invasion came, they wouldn't have enough guns to arm half the Home Guard, let alone the Army. So, the War Office gave an impossible order. Build a submachine gun that costs less than £3 and make it in weeks, not months. That's when two men, Major Reginald Shepard and designer Harold Turpin, stepped forward with an idea that would change wartime weaponry forever. They took the initials of their names, ST, and added yen for Enfield, the Royal Arms factory. The result was Sten, a weapon so stripped down, so brutally simple, it could be manufactured anywhere that had a welding torch. Unlike the precision machine German guns, the Sten was a Frankenstein of shortcuts. Its body was a steel tube, literally the same kind used in plumbing. Its parts were stamped, welded, and bolted together with minimal tools. No fancy machining, no polished finish, no artistry. Just a pipe, a spring, and a magazine. It fired the same 9mm rounds as the German MP-40, so in theory, soldiers could use captured ammunition. That was part of its genius. It was small, easy to mass-produce, and could be broken down into parts that resistance groups could smuggle across occupied Europe. For the first time, a weapon of war could be built like a household appliance. But there was a trade-off, a brutal one. The Sten's simplicity came at the cost of reliability, accuracy, and safety. The magazine fed from the side, an awkward design that made aiming clumsy and jamming common. Its metal body bent easily, misaligned rounds, and turned combat into a gamble. Still, the British Army pushed it into production. By 1941, tens of thousands rolled off assembly lines, from Enfield to small-town workshops and even bicycle factories. Each cost less than $10 to make. The soldiers hated it. Commanders distrusted it. But Britain had no choice. It was the gun of the desperate, the kind of weapon built not for pride, but for survival. For men on the front lines, the Sten became both a blessing and a curse. It was light, compact, and deadly in close quarters when it worked. But when it didn't, it could spell death. The gun's crude welding meant it often overheated, jammed, or misfired. Its open-bolt mechanism left it vulnerable to dirt and sand, a nightmare in combat zones like North Africa. Even a small knock to the bolt could set it off accidentally. Soldiers learned the hard way that the Sten could kill its owner just as easily as the enemy. Yet despite everything, it spread. Like a virus, the Sten appeared in every theater of war, from the frozen forests of Norway to the ruins of Warsaw. Resistance fighters adored it. It could be hidden under a coat, built in a basement, or repaired with scrap parts. For the oppressed, it was liberation in metal form. The Sten became the symbol of the underdog, a rough, improvised answer to Nazi engineering perfection. A gun that said, "We may not have precision, but we have grit." By 1944, more than 4 million Sten guns had been produced. Factories in Britain, Canada, and even underground workshops across Europe churned them out by the thousands. And in the eyes of Allied command, the mission was accomplished. A cheap, mass-produced weapon for an army that refused to die. But in the chaos of war, cost-cutting comes with a price. The Sten may have saved Britain's war effort, but for countless soldiers, it became a silent executioner. A weapon that fired when it shouldn't. That jammed when it mustn't. That turned a soldier's courage into a game of chance. Next, we uncover the dark side of the Sten, the battlefield nightmares, the fatal flaws, and the true meaning behind its nickname, the plumber's pipe. Every weapon tells a story, not just of who it killed, but of who it failed. The Sten Gun was supposed to be the poor man's submachine gun, a savior forged from steel tubes and welding sparks. But on the battlefield, that simplicity became its curse. The first models, the Sten MKI and MK2, were notoriously unreliable. Their magazines were the main culprit. 50 rounds were designed to fit neatly into a double-stack, single-feed system, an engineering shortcut meant to save time and metal. But it didn't work. The rounds misaligned easily. A bit of dirt, a bend in the spring, or one wrong tilt of the magazine, and the gun stopped dead. In training, it was an inconvenience. In battle, a death sentence. In sandy environments, the Sten was almost unusable. Its open bolt system left the chamber exposed. Dust, grit, and mud found their way in easily. And then there were the accidental discharges. A single bump to the bolt could send the weapon firing uncontrollably. Soldiers were told never to drop it, never to rest it loaded, and never to trust the safety catch, because there wasn't one that worked properly. In one report from 1943, a unit in Italy lost 2 men in a single night, both shot by their own Stens. The British Army even circulated warnings, do not carry a loaded Sten unless engaging the enemy. But in the chaos of battle, that rule didn't always stick. When Operation Overlord began, thousands of soldiers jumped into Normandy with Stens slung over their shoulders. Light, compact, and easy to replace, the Sten was ideal for paratroopers. Yet for every man who praised its portability, another cursed its unpredictability. But perhaps nowhere did the Sten earn its notorious reputation more vividly than in the hands of resistance fighters. The British government dropped thousands of Stens into occupied Europe, cheap to make, easy to smuggle. The Polish Home Army, the French Maquis, and the Norwegian resistance all relied on them. To partisans, it was a miracle, a gun they could assemble in minutes and repair with basic tools. But even they joked about its fragility. Still, they made it work. Improvised, cleaned, adjusted. Anything to make the crude pipe gun do its job. That spirit of adaptation turned the Sten into something more than a weapon. It became a symbol of defiance, of using what little you had against overwhelming power. But to the professional soldier, the Sten remained a necessary evil, a compromise made in the name of survival. Even within the British Army, resentment brewed. Soldiers joked that Sten stood for spit, tinker, and pray. One officer called it a plumber's nightmare that somehow shoots bullets. And the nickname stuck, the plumber's pipe. It was ugly, improvised, and unmistakably working class, the exact opposite of the polished, mechanical beauty of German arms. But that was part of its message. Britain couldn't match Germany's resources. But it could outlast them, with grit, resourcefulness, and whatever pipe could be welded into a gun. Yet even as production continued, the Sten's flaws remained. Misfires, jams, and accidents haunted every variant, even the later MKV, which tried to fix its sins with better balance and a wooden stock. But nothing could erase its origin. The Sten was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to exist. By 1945, over 4 million Stens had been produced. 4 million chances for survival or failure. When the war ended, so did the Sten's reign. Britain had survived, the invasion never came, and the world had moved on to better weapons. But the Sten left a strange legacy behind, one built not on glory but on necessity. For a while, the British kept it in service, refining it into later models, the MKV and MK6, but the scars of its early reputation never healed. To veterans, it remained the gun that spat, rattled, and prayed. To engineers, it was a symbol of wartime innovation, proof that a gun could be made fast, cheap, and functional under the worst of conditions. And to historians, it stood as one of the most influential designs of the century. The Sten paved the way for an entire generation of compact submachine guns, the Sterling that replaced it, the Uzi in Israel, even the Mac-10 in America. All of them borrowed the Sten's core idea, a simple blowback design, mass-producible, and deadly in close combat. It changed the philosophy of warfare, from craftsmanship to pragmatism. By the 1950s, the Sten had faded into obsolescence. But it never truly disappeared. It appeared in Korea, in the jungles of Vietnam, in the hands of insurgents, militias, and even terrorists, because it could be built almost anywhere. From the slums of Belfast to the mountains of Afghanistan, homemade versions surfaced decades after the war. The plumber's pipe had become the world's first truly democratic submachine gun. Anyone could make it, anyone could use it. And that perhaps was its most dangerous legacy. For the men who carried it, the Sten wasn't about pride or precision. It was about survival. A tool made from the scraps of a dying empire, wielded by ordinary soldiers against extraordinary odds. It was never beautiful, never refined, never reliable, but it was there when nothing else was. That's why they called it the plumber's pipe. Not just because it looked like one, but because, like a pipe, it carried the lifeblood of a nation under siege. In the end, the Sten wasn't a weapon of mastery, it was a weapon of survival. A reminder that sometimes winning a war isn't about perfection. It's about refusing to give up, even when all you've got is a pipe, a spring, and hope.